and on behalf of the European Union Office to Hong Kong and Macau, and the organizer of the Hong Kong Book Fair 2018, I would like to thank Mr. Jonevs for his incredible support and contributions to this key event, which is purposefully organized in the context of the European Year of Cultural Heritage 2018. Mr. Jonevs is a Latvian writer and winner of the 2014 edition of the European Union Prize for Literature, EUPL. He works as a short story writer, theatre writer, and copywriter, and has also worked as a translator and literary critic. He received his higher education in Riga, the capital of Latvia, where he earns a master's degree at the Latvian Academy of Culture. His debut novel, Doomed 94, was a national bestseller upon its release in 2013, and the book later won the EU Prize for Literature in 2014. Since its creation in 2009, the European Prize for Literature has aimed to shine a spotlight on the diverse wealth of Europe's contemporary literature in the field of fiction, through promoting cross-border mobility of those working in the cultural sector, encouraging the transnational circulation of cultural and artistic output, and fostering intercultural dialogue. The year 2018 marks 10th anniversary of the prize. Coming back to the winning novel, the action of the novel takes place in the 90s in the Latvian city of Jelgava, 3 years after Latvia regained its independence. The story portrays how the adolescents stand against the whole perceived nihilistic world and searched for their own identity during the passionate pursuit of the alternative culture of heavy metal music. It combines a diary of a youngster trying to find himself by joining the subculture and a documentary-like depiction of the beginnings of the second independence of Latvia. In his previous interview, Mr. Jonevs once said, "The book is about how we grow up as human beings, in the sense that what seemed important is losing its positions, being replaced by something else, and no one can do anything about it." The book has so far been translated into 7 European languages and published in 6 European countries. In the seminar, Mr. Jonevs will speak about the relation between reality and fiction in European literature, his experiences with winning the prize, as well as his EUPL-winning novel, Doomed 94. So it's surely time for Mr. Jonevs to share all his insights, and may I now invite him to speak. Mr. Janis, please.
Okay. Yeah, you see, I'm not really a literary critic, so I'll try to speak about these European tendencies, but I don't have this objective view on them. I can only talk how do they reflect in my own writing, or as how I see them reflecting. Yeah, I don't have this overwhelming panoramic view, because I think I'm too deep inside this European literature, and I don't have this outer look. But okay, I'll try it first. I would like to tell a little about Latvia, just to get it clear. Okay, so you see the green country is Latvia. It's in the Eastern Europe, about 2 million people there. And okay, we have some, as we are just between Europe and Russia, we've always been like on the front line. And just 100 years ago, we finally got our independence, but then it was interrupted by Soviet power. But now we are like free again. Now to our literature, I'll just mention some literary classics, just very few of them. I guess my literature teacher won't ever forgive me for that, but okay. So our national literature started at the end of 19th century. Our first novel was published in 1879, and that's the same year when the Karamazov Brothers by Dostoevsky was published. So we were not really on the first lines, but okay, here are some classics. Janis, poet and playwright. Jānis Drabiņš, writer. Aleksandrs Čaks, poet. Ojārs Vācietis, poet. Vīsma Belševica, poet and writer. Imants Ziedonis, poet. And so, as you can see, almost all of them are poets, and that's one particular feature of Latvian literature, that it's not like that in the rest of Europe. In Europe, like for centuries, Novel is the king. But in Latvia, all the big stars are poets. I've heard that it's like similar situation in Ireland, but not in Central or Western Europe. So why is that? I don't really know. Maybe because of our folklore traditions, and we have some very rich poetic folklore tradition, what we call national songs. But it could be also because of this history when we were always under some foreign power, and our literature was almost never free. And so like poetry, I guess, was the good instrument to put some subtext and some hidden messages to it, and these poems can easily become like national anthems, like a mantra, what to repeat. And so we kind of forgot a little about prose. The normal situation for a Latvian writer is that he prefers Latvian poetry and translated prose. But now we're free again, and so, as I like to say, the writers, the poets, they used to have very high social status. They were like national heroes. But now there's no more need for that. Now we have to be just writers again, and so that's the situation where I hope the prose will get back its positions, and so I hope I will give some input into that. So about my book, that's the Latvian cover. Jelgava 94. Jelgava, it's a city where the action takes place, but as the name of the city doesn't really ring a bell in English or French or speaking countries or in Hong Kong, so the English title is Doom 94. Doom, it's mean here as a fate, as a destiny. And okay, the book is, in general, it's about teenagers in 90s in this freshly independent Latvia. In general, it's like a story about story of coming of age, but on the background of this alternative music, heavy metal, and one subgenre was Doom 94. Just Doom metal. So from there the title, and the action starts at 94. So this makes sense. Doom 94. And the book was somehow it was a great success in Latvia. It was reprinted 7 times, and it was compared to Catcher in the Rye by Salinger. Okay, of course it's a great comparison, but as I used to love this book when I was a teenager, so could be. And I was thinking why it was success, because I'm not an experienced writer. I don't know any tricks really. Okay, I worked like for 14 years in advertisement. Maybe that helped me. But I think one key to success could be that I never tried to make these adventures in the book to be super elevated, super crazy, super cool stuff. After writing a book, I received a lot of letters that told me we had the same. It happened to us, but our case was like much bigger. Our adventures were crazier, and that's how I think why people love this. They like feel like better because they can they feel kind of empathy, and at the same time this makes them cooler, if I can use this word. And but I think that's the magic of being young. When if you look back objectively on these events, then it was nothing big. I I didn't travel at the time to Hong Kong. I traveled to capital of Latvia, Riga, like maybe 40 kilometers. But it was a big event, and it's like this magic of being young, that these small events are enormous for you, and the rest of the world, you just ignore that. It has no importance. At this time, the political situation in Latvia was very not calm at all. The Russian army has just left. No, it was like end of Soviet power, but this ex-Soviet army was still there, and the government was never stable, and the criminal situation was very harsh. But I almost don't touch any of these subjects in my book, because it's not important for teenagers what's going on the politics as these. It was much more important to get some new music record. So yeah, that's maybe one of the key points of this book, is like how small things can become like everything. And the main themes in my book, it's like, okay, I'll just mention them now, but I'll talk about that later. It's like the place, the city of Jelgava, the time, 90s, being young, memory. It's how memory does some kind of tricks to us. I'll speak about it later. And also one motif, it's like treason, because like this main character commits several treasons during the book. Because I guess it's like, what does it mean to come of age? It's like to break the promises you gave before. So that's what like becoming adult is about. Okay, when I was writing this book, almost nobody knew that I was writing, maybe some 3 or 4 people, and I had no deadlines and no expectations, and as I believed, no influences, but I believed to be super independent writer, and while writing, I was never sure that it will be published. But now when it's published and it has got some success, then I can find still some influences, and I understand that I was never really independent, so I can just try to speak about some European tendencies, which I see in a lot of books that have been published recently in 2000s, and what I see also in mine. So yeah, let's get to European tendencies. So far, so good. You understand me? Okay. Yes, novel without a fiction. This term, as far as I know, it was coined by Patrick Deville, French writer. Okay, in general, it means that you don't invent the plot, but you just took some historical event or autobiographical event. And here I mentioned some examples. This first, Edouard Louis, his book is in fact rather similar to mine. Okay, the action takes place in France, in a little village close to Amiens, but yeah, he's like about young, sensible guy who tries to break out of this village. The next, Magid Sherfi, he lives in France, but he's an Arab, Maghreb, so he's speaking about growing up in this Maghreb community and wishing to become a writer one day. Okay, Pavel Senayev, a Russian writer, he was a rather successful screenwriter, but then one day he decided to write a book about his childhood, and it was the greatest success, much greater than his movies. Yes, and so on. The last one, Piotr Weil, he's a Russian writer. On the beginning of 2000s, once a journalist asked him how it is to be a Russian writer today, and he said it's like easier than it ever was, because all you have to do is you go outside on the street and you ask the first person, how's your life, and then just write down what he is telling and then publish it and get your money. So in my case, it was not so easy, because I used my own life as a material. So I had just somehow to open myself as this Dirk Kurkjeveit, he's also in this list, German writer, as he says in his book, you have to become a historian of your own life. And it's not always easy, because once you think, okay, I'll tell this funny situation, what I remember so well, and it was so super funny, but when you write it down, that you see it's not funny at all, and then you think, why did it seem so funny for me? And you understand that you have to tell to the writer how you was like, and you have to tell it honestly, because it was funny or something that you did expect to happen, and you have to tell about your deepest expectations. So you have to show your naked core for the writer. But when I started to dream about being a writer when I was like 15 years old, but I never told it to anybody. But some of my friends, they just saw me through, and I couldn't hide that from. And at this time in the 90s, a friend of mine told me, just sit down and write about what's happening to us. But I thought, okay, sorry, but I'm looking for much greater plots. But okay, after 20 years, I still haven't found nothing better, so I just followed his advice, and here's the book. But I had to, so I decided to keep it to reality, how it happened, how I remember this. Yeah, so this is what is written on the first page. But yes, as I use my memory as an instrument, I'd say it's rather about some subjective reality, it's not a documentary. I just use my memory, and sometimes I feel that I remember better what happened like 20 years ago than what happened like 2 months ago, because everything was so intense at the time, everything was so bright, and I just have this feeling that I remember it clearly, perfectly. But okay, writing the book and making some research, I understood that our memory has this tendency to become creative. So while writing, I made some discoveries that some things that I was absolutely sure about, that they were not like that in memories of other people. And it happened to forget something, and so also forgetting is creative. Our brain just picks up some uncomfortable facts, or just vice versa, maybe. So I wrote the third part of the book, where the main character, who is almost me but not 100%, he is already an adult, and then he just happens for him to fall back into his teenage past, into memories, and then he discovers that it was not really like that, how he described it before. It's like, as George Orwell said in his seminal book in 1984, that the past is the most important thing, because it can be changed, it belongs to us, but I think that it can be changed. In fact, you can be sure that it belongs to you, and it was like that. But no, it can change someday. And also this fiction and reality. Okay, not everything is super real in my book. I used also some imagination, but I try to stick as close as possible. And even in one case, I organized reality for my book, because now, in fact, in real life, because I needed how to end the second part, how to start the third part of the book, how this adult character falls into memories. And I understood that he needs to he has to meet someone important from his past. And I knew that some guy from this black metal band Skyforger, who is like the most famous black metal band in Latvia. But I knew that the leader of this band, singer, he works as a plumber. He never became rich, but I knew that he works as a plumber. So I got his phone number, and I called him and I said that, okay, my toilet is out of order, please come. And then he arrived, and I said, I remember you. And this happens also in my book, only in the book it was like surprise, but in reality I knew that. But this gave me some turning points, so I kind of organized real life events to become a part of the book. So that's some kind of relation between fiction and reality in my case. Okay, some other trend. I think recently we see it more and more in European literature. It's this love for the local. If it was some village near Amiens for Edouard Louis, and this Arab downtown for Magid Cherfi, and Poland for Eastern European specific features, which in Western European reader love so much, and for Jérôme Ferrari, who won the Goncourt Prize in France. He's a French guy, but he's writing about Corsica. It's like a little island, which is like it is considered the territory of France, but they speak different language. They have different culture. And Jo Nesbø, it's a very famous Swedish detective writer, but I think he's so famous also because he speaks so much about this local Swedish things. And I think the key to this is that people like to speak and about something that only few know. If you have something that everybody has, if you know something that everybody knows, then it's like it feels like having nothing. So, like, I think in our days, this periphery has tendency to become the real center. And so, for me, this local place, it's my city, Jelgava. It looks much better in picture as in real life, and there's even it's a picture from Wikipedia, in fact. Oh, sorry. I just wanted to point. Yes, in the middle you can see my house, the ugliest one. But never mind. It was. That's the fourth biggest city in Latvia, but it's not a big deal in Latvia. It's about 50,000 people there, and it was almost completely destroyed during the war, and it never regained its pre-war beauty, and it was like reconstructed in Soviet times, and it's considered as maybe the ugliest city in Latvia, and it's famous for having this psychiatric hospital and 2 prisons and the largest prison break in Latvian history. So it's like a rather sad place. But when you're a teenager and you feel like a rebel against all the world, so it becomes like a perfect place. I guess me and my friends, and what I tell about this in this book, we made this city like the center of the universe. It was like the most important place, the worst place for living, but the best place for playing heavy metal. So I have another picture how it looks from inside. Yeah, it's like I live in this part. So. Yeah, that's what an old metalhead said about Jelgava. And when the book was translated into French, I met some French reader who said, I had exactly the same feelings and the same adventures in my life. And I asked, where did you live? And he said, in Paris. And I said, no, how could that be possible? Yeah, but okay, maybe Jelgava is really a state of mind and you can find your own ugly village everywhere. Okay, the next trend, it's like close to the second one. It's like love for this marginal activities, marginal communities, like this. Yeah, well, my book is about heavy metal fans, and I'm pretty sure it's the first book like that in Latvia. But after that, when the book was translated in Norway, I had this meeting with Erlend Eriksen, Norwegian writer, and he has written a book. Okay, it's not translated in English, but the English title is National Satanist, and it's absolutely about Norwegian black metal. And this Virginie Despentes, who is the third in the list, he also writes about some subcultural musicians. And Emmanuel Carrer Limonov, it's a book about some very underground politician who created the Party of National Bolsheviks, which is almost a terrorist organization, but he's rather funny than really dangerous, this guy. Okay, and Jean Genet, it's not contemporary writer, but still very influential. And his book, he speaks about these drag queens of Paris. So it's like this tendency to write about very marginal people, but somehow these books are read by normal people in large quantities. So, and I don't really believe that it's just a wish to look in these dirty secrets. I think it's because all the normal readers also some kind of empathy, and they feel some kind of the same. It's like these marginal people do the same, but in some concentrated way. So here's one picture from my past. I'm the guy in this blue jacket, like showing, that was my hair like in 90s. And sure, we took some scary pictures in graveyards. That was a must. Yeah, it looks funny now, but now we believe that we're doing something really black, and the normal people are afraid of us. But okay, later I understood that nobody's really afraid of metalheads, and it's like the funny part how almost all of my friends, we were very sensitive, almost nerdy guys who loved reading, loved history, and never fighting. But the music we listened to, it was about demons and decapitating and everything. Here's some. No, it's not me, but it's from some concert in 90s. We had a concerts every time when Friday happened to be on the 13th. It's generally considered as a super bad sign in Europe and in Latvia if a Friday happens on the 13th date. But for metal lovers, it was always a concert on that day. It was called the Black Friday, and I never felt some curse of that day. So yeah, don't believe it. Well, one more trend. It's like disappearance and the same time integration of the short story. Yes, lately, in the last decades, the short stories kind of lost its popularity. It was very popular some time ago, the most in this Anglo-Saxon world. But now it's disappearing. I love short story a lot, but my translator and editor said you better find some bigger plot for a novel, because you'll never sell a collection of short stories. And it's in all the Europe, in the United Kingdom, I don't really know why people prefer novels in this. it's kind of age of Twitter, yeah, and people love like short texts, but people who read prefer long texts. Yeah, it could be mysterious, but it could be linked also to this phenomenon that TV series are becoming much more popular. Not just one movie, but like series what you can watch for like 3 months. But I still love this short story, and I formed my book, the structure of the book. I took it a little from Agatha Christophe, who's like a French. He writes in French. Okay, she was writing in French, but she's of Hungarian descent. She left Hungary during this anti-Soviet revolution, and she started to write in French and became a famous writer. And I translated this novel, and I very like the structure that every chapter is like a separate, very short story. And that how I wrote also my novel. And then I found out that also this book, Vernon Subutex by French Virginie Despentes, and The Invisible Cities by Italian writer Italo Calvino, are structured also very closely to that. And I see some kind of cheating there. I guess they would love to write short stories, but this was the way how to integrate them in the novel. So this book by Italo Calvino, it could be easily called a collection of short stories, but it's like presented as a novel. Yeah, that's so some interesting trend. Okay, and one last trend. It's about After Effects. Yeah, as you understand, I always felt like a super independent underground guy, and I wrote this book about underground world. But it somehow became popular, and so there are some effects. The girls wearing T-shirts with the title of my book, but okay, this still looks kind of alternative. But then I found, okay, and they also making a movie now. You can see this Jelgava 94 on the jacket. It's the Latvian title. Okay, that's all. That's great. But then I found such picture on the internet, like and it doesn't look so metal anymore, you know. And then it got even worse, like that. And so yes, and I understood that that's also some trend of this contemporary literature, is that somehow system manages to consume you and to make you cute and well loved. So that's what some old metalheads, old friends of mine, are not content about. That it became too trendy. So, but nothing to be done yet. No. Okay, these are the foreign editions of my book. It's translated. It's in French, Norwegian, Slovenian, Croatian, Estonian, Hungarian, and English. Okay, I just have to advertise a little. I would like to advertise the Wrecking Ball Press, my English editor. And this all happened thanks to this platform, Latvian Literature.lv, which they do this job of exporting the Latvian literature to foreign countries. Yeah. Okay, that's like the end of my presentation.
So thank you, Mr. Jonevs, for giving us such a detailed presentation of the current trends in European literature. So it's time for questions, and questions can all be asked in both English and Cantonese, in Latvian, possibly. and does anyone have any questions?
I just wondered how big of an influence 1984 was on this novel, since you mentioned it earlier.
I mentioned whom?
Orwell was in 1984.
Orwell.
Did it influence you at all when you were writing the novel?
This novel by George Orwell? No, not really. I just happened to mention him because of this quote about the past. But could be that the title was influenced by that in some. I didn't invent the title. It was my editor. Maybe he was somehow thinking about that. Yeah, but of course the title of 1984, it's deep in all our brains. So yeah, could be that the title is influenced by that. Yeah.
Yes, please.
Good evening. Yeah.
Good evening.
Well, the very first Latvian writer that I heard about is Nora Ikstenes.
Nora
Yes,
Ikstene.
yeah, Madeas Pienes.
Matas Piens, yes.
Yeah. I just would like to know, as a peer writer of her, so how do you find her book? Because I find that she seems to be the first Latvian writer that the world knows better about Latvia. So how do you find her work as a peer writer? Thank you.
Yeah, I loved her book, but and that's true. She could be the most famous Latvian writer for this moment in the world. Okay, she's not the most famous in our Latvian literature history, but for that moment, yeah, she I guess she's number one. I love this book a lot while reading, but for me it was, if I think after reading it, it was maybe a little too sad. I always look for to find some funny stuff in all these sad and tragic events. Yeah, so I like this just to make a contrast. Yeah, but okay, in general, yeah, it's a very good book. It is also translated into English. Yes.
Yes, please.
Sorry.
Hi. So you mentioned that memories are not immutable. So I was just wondering, what new perspectives have you gained each time you look back at the past? Thank you.
Well, I played this theory in the third part of the book when the main character looks back at these days. To tell it, I have to spoil a little. Okay, but the situation was that all this book, he's like 100% sure that one of the girls is in love with him, and he's like, she's not the prettiest girl, and somehow he thinks, oh, what a pity that just this girl happened to be in love with me. Okay, but nothing to be done. But then in the third part, when they meet as an adults, he finds out that it was a mistake. No, it was just a misunderstanding. She was never in love with him, and all these years that passed with that thought, it was in fact it was just a misunderstanding. So yeah, so he has to rethink how it was really. How did some people acted like that? The things already passed started to change for him. Okay, and some other motives too, but okay, that's the clearest one. But also maybe that we were so sure that we were considered as rebellious, dangerous guys by everyone, and 20 years after, I say, okay, everyone, sorry that we scared all of you, and they say, no, you didn't scare anyone. In fact, that's also how it's changing sometimes.
Hi, hello. Thanks for the presentation. A couple of questions. One, why do you write, and what do you think is the role of the writer? And second, I understood that you said that you created an encounter with the lead singer of the band that didn't happen in the 90s. And I'm curious, why did you feel like doing that?
well, why do I write? Well, it's a very complex question. For that case, one of the motives was that I felt that these teenage years, they were like super important for me, but now I remember them very well. But in some years, I'll start to forget it. So I have to keep it because it was maybe the most important time of my life. So to keep it, not to forget it, I have to write it down. And I think the widespread motif of writing is that you can have these godlike feelings, that you can create your universe and you're the boss there. But that was not really my case. I think that these events to write, I never made this pseudo myself really better than I am, because when I did that, it was not fun anymore. So yeah, I can't really say that I was boss in my writing. Well, about this meeting, why didn't I meet him in 90s? You mean I was never lucky enough to meet him. He was like a big star, but now when I'm adult, I just called him to my house as a plumber. It was, that's funny, but he's like a superstar in metal scene, but at the same time he's still working as a plumber. So, and I found this situation to be such an absurdity in this fact. So I imagined the situation that this ancient ex-metal fan meets his idol, like in a toilet after several years. It seemed some very nice moment for a book, so I organized it in real life, and it turned out just okay. He didn't know about that, but I knew. And I forgot to say, if you want to have some books, there are 4, and you can have them in English. Yes.
Any more questions? Okay.
It's not a question, but a request. Is it possible that you read out maybe a couple of paragraphs in English or in Latvian that you like about your book? I think it's good to share with the audience. Thank you.
Okay, so I guess I'll do it in English. And I can do it in Latvian too, but... Okay, it's the beginning of the second part, when the main heroes, there's 3 of them, they're hitchhiking to Riga, the capital of Latvia, because they've heard, okay, it's the very beginning of independent Latvia, and it's very hard to find some music records. There are some maybe 2 music shops in Riga, but you can't find some underground music there. But the main heroes, they've heard that in Riga, in some forest, there is a place where people illegally sell these audio cassettes. It was really like that. We went there. So they're hitchhiking to that place. The road from Jelgava to Riga isn't that interesting. No hills, no valleys. All you can do is imagine. It's like the entire region was carefully constructed to train the imagination. And once the train spits you out and you take in your surroundings, everything looks like something you can't wait to tell your friends about. But what do they need your sudden poetism for? They're looking it all right now, and they're probably thinking about themselves, which is why you're doing the same. Behold, the Zemgale lowlands, flat, terrible, nowhere to hide, no salvation. It's like this geography of Latvia. It's not very interesting. Or when I was a kid, it seemed so boring for me that there's no hills, nothing. It's just like lowlands, and I had this feeling that I was born in the most boring place in the world, but then that's, I think, all the kids think the same. The sun lit up the Spurs Beach Grove, drawing the eye to the cemeteries hidden there. There in the distance is Lithuania. And right before that legendary country is the station for a town called Meitene, our word for the girl. How I'd love to be there. It's some play of words. A little closer to us is the haunted Elea Manor. Then comes Jelgava, no comment. And then Uolaine. It's also the name of the city. The end of it all, a living nightmare, the anarchy capital of Latvia, a rogue territory with its own set of rules. That's where we found ourselves just then. We were supposedly pro-anarchy, or at least we were for now, drawing jagged A's with circles around them. But the anarchy in Uolaine was the real deal. It consisted of dark and harsh laws. This is where all of Jelgava junkies started out and get their drugs. MDMA was manufactured there by the conveyor full. The police supposedly confiscated them by the hundreds of kilograms and incinerated them. Once Karlis, it's a name, went to Uolaine with a group of his buddies for a friendly basketball game. Their bus was pelted with rocks. Sometimes they even threw rocks at the passing trains. I was on a train once when it happened. As soon as the train pulled away from Uolaine, the rocks started flying. One hit the window on the other end of the train car, and another just barely missed my window. I was always lucky like that. But now we were a better target for this city. We were smaller than a train, of course, but we weren't made of metal. Metal was only in our hearts. And this was not the best place for young guys with hair longer than that was socially acceptable. Mine was down to my shoulders, almost. Janis, whom no one called that like that anymore except his mother and our teachers, was the only one with hair actually down to his shoulders. He'd been growing it out longer than it had, but it wasn't growing in length so much as in width. He took that in stride and always said, whatever, Tony looks more like the poodle than me. It was hard to say exactly how long Edgar's hair was because it mostly stuck in all directions, but it was definitely longer than the norm. Because you know it's like the must for metalheads to have long hair. But at the time it was rather dangerous to walk like that in the streets because you could just beaten up. It was like a harsh time. Our jeans are even skinnier than before and ripped at the knees. Everyone wears trainers with the tongues pulled out on black t-shirts. Janis has an obituary shirt. They're our new cult group. They were from Miami and were one of the pioneers of death metal. And we are metalheads. Janis is particular in death metal, which is why we call him now Death. It's hard to believe that he found the shirt at a rummage sale. It was a miracle, really. After that, we all stormed the rummage sales to dig through the heaps of clothes. I even made my mom a list of what shirts to grab if she saw them. Death, Cannibal Corpse, Anal Cunt, Brutal Truth, Carcass, Hypocrisy. She never found any of them, but once brought back a Michael Learned to Rock shirt with 3 smiling guys on it. Despite my rebellious nihilism, my heart almost broke from how sweet it was, but I could never bring myself to wear the shirt. But Des managed to find an obituary shirt for 50 centimes. Yet he still wasn't happy. He was a little superstitious and believed that he'd bought bad luck when he'd bought the shirt. Though that didn't stop him from wearing it religiously. Even now he was saying, I told you, something always goes wrong when I'm wearing this shirt. We'd just been kicked off the train from Jelgava to Riga. And for nothing, we just didn't have tickets. The brigade of conductors took one look at our hair and left us at the next station. The train moved on, but we stayed here in Uolaine. What now, boys? So, something about that.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the public? So before it ends, can I have some questions?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. When I was reading some parts of the book, I was wondering if the Latvian literature has been translated enough into English or other European languages?
No, it's just starting thanks to Latvian literature.lv, and I think also this globalization tendencies. But it's hard for Eastern European in general to get in English language market. It's much easier to get into French market, for example. As one editor once told me that if you enter a bookshop in France, then about 40% of books are translated. But in London, it's about 3% maybe, because there's already enough books in English. So yeah, but okay, it's starting. So yeah.
So how do you find the Western European reaction to your book when it was translated into the languages?
Well, at first I was surprised that somebody wants to translate it at all, but it like seemed to me super local. As my friends after reading it said it, okay, it's kind of interesting, but it's just interesting for us who were listening to metal at the time, and then others were saying it's just interesting for them, for people who lived in 90s, for people who live in Latvia, and then these concentric rings just got wider and wider, and so it reached Western Europe. Yeah, but they can't relate to this economical situation what we had in Latvia. We were like kind of rather poor, but they still can relate to this growing up, growing on aspect. I think I somehow managed. I was lucky to touch some universal metrics of growing up, and that's also one paradox that when we were like 15 years old, we believed that we are like unique beings and no one will ever understand us. But now it turns out that like thousands of people felt the same way. So yeah, it's like maybe that's growing up, that you lose your belief of being unique. Yeah.
Okay, so one last question regarding youth identity, because obviously I'm a youngster, so I would like to ask some questions related to it. You mentioned previously in your interview that Latvia, back in 1994, after the independence, was almost like an adolescent. And how would you compare it with your country of the time?
That's what the comparison I made in this interview, that we were teenagers and the country itself was like a teenager, because it was like 3 years of this regained independence, and there was no clear vision of what will happen next, and there were no more socialism and not capitalism. We were just like in this gray territory between the two, so with no clear plans for future, but like sudden freedom to do whatever you want. So that's what I just made some poetic comparison to how we felt and how country was like. I'm not sure it's 100% well based, this comparison, but that